Hello, my name is Lucie Lederhendler. I'm the curator at the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba. We are here in a hybrid lunch and look. Everybody in the gallery is welcome to listen in. We're just trying to be available for people. Everybody in the gallery is welcome to join us in this conversation, but we're also projecting online. Yeah. So people from home, we're going to be talking to our laptops, but you're welcome to stay. Megumi was here earlier in the day. I have no idea who's online, actually. Anybody can tune in. Wherever you're joining us from, we are here in Brandon, Manitoba on Treaty 2 territory, the traditional shared lands of the Anishinaabe, Dakota, Dene, Oji-Cree, and Cree people. This is also the homeland of the Métis Nation. Today with me in the gallery, hybrid is always an adventure, is artist Kevin McKenzie, who has just opened a new exhibition, ayîkisis, last night. Kevin McKenzie is a Brandon-based Cree Métis artist and a member of the Cowessess First Nation. He has exhibited across Turtle Island and internationally, including the National Gallery of Canada and the National Museum of the American Indian at the Smithsonian Institute. His practice juxtaposes sacred and ceremonial objects from Indigenous cultures with similar objects from settler cultures, building tension between elevation and denigration. Nostalgia, ritual, and performances of masculinity pervade his oeuvre. With bison skulls lit in gaudy neon or painted up like hot rods, office attire rendered in materials indigenous to the prairies, or in his latest series, hockey gear built out of deer skin and elk rawhide. Welcome, Kevin. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
So the first thing that we'll do, I think, is take people on a virtual tour of the exhibition. We've talked about a few different ways that you can enter into the exhibition because there are two very specific portals that you conceived of. So the first one, this is the front wall of the gallery. As you walk in, you can see that there's a bison skull called Custom, which we're going to visit later in the tour. And on the floor, this ring of protective cups built out of elk rawhide and horsehair. And this one's called Healing Circle. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the Healing Circle was part of a larger exhibition that I exhibited last year at the Fifth Parallel Art Gallery at the University of Regina. And it had a lot to do with my research for my MFA thesis. And so that was part of my MFA thesis exhibition. Yeah, that's actually a really good shot because it does show that entire exhibition, which was titled 17. Mm-hmm. And so there was a lot of things that had to line up for that particular body of work and that body of research to, I guess, manifest itself externally. Yeah. And so it was called titled 17 because of the direction of the research that was taking me. I had to reference my father a lot and my experiences with my father growing up. He was a survivor of the Lebret Industrial Indian Residential School. And unfortunately, he was not a survivor in real life because he died at a very young age, and he was 39 years old, and I was 17 years old when that happened. So it was a very traumatic experience. And I wanted to bring that experience into the research, but also have it portrayed through the work itself. And so 17, with that circle, it repeats itself over and over again because there's 17 objects in a 17-foot circle, and it goes counterclockwise to the objects. And so what I wanted it to be was more of a portal that goes back in time.
And a lot of, I don't want to call them Easter eggs, but a lot of codes, a lot of things to decipher throughout this most recent series that you have. So Healing Circle, they're very delicate because it's horsehair and rawhide. They weigh almost nothing, but they're sturdy enough that they can be on the ground, and you invite people to step into that portal, right? To be at the center of it, to watch the motion go in this direction, right?
Yeah, it's meant to be interactive. So people, are are invited to get into that circle and see what happens.
So you can see also that it's quite crowded between two columns because it's specifically 17 feet in diameter. And we have, I think, 18 and a half feet between these columns.
Right.
And I have been watching people carefully scooch, between the 6 inches that are left instead of allowing themselves in. I think that's a really interesting way to use an art space as well, to challenge people. Don't make yourself uncomfortable. Don't let yourself be uncomfortable. Let yourself be open. So here we have a close-up of these forms, which are, on the one hand, literally protective cups, and on the other hand, tadpoles.
Right.
Yeah. So we'll see the tadpole motif again. This is something. These are the most sculptural of the tadpoles in there, and they are swimming. You have this. I think everybody can see in the picture here, because of the organic nature of horsehair. They're all in a flow pattern. They're all individuals who are swimming along this kind of current. Right. There's something very aquatic and motion filled about it.
Yeah, it's intentional. On my part to make them these objects. They look really bizarre in a sense, because you can see what they're made of, and you're looking at how they're constructed, and at the same time you're thinking about what that motif is, and that motif does repeat itself, the tadpole, and so there's a lot of things that are I guess repeating themselves throughout the entire exhibition.
Tadpoles are so interesting to me because they are this kind of primordial aquatic form. They're kind of a basic signifier, but everybody has different connections to them. So with this series, I think of horseshoe crabs, which has a lot to do with my youth. People might see sperm. People might see a human head with a ponytail. There's a lot of ways to interpret these things. So beyond there is the rest of the series. Starting, I'm just going to go from left to right as things are displayed, and this is actually a perfect way to start because it's a protective cup with harness that's done in a different way than those tadpoles.
Right, yeah, and so, I mean, that was one of the first pieces that I made, and basically, I wanted to create an entire ensemble of this hockey paraphernalia, and so it had to start somewhere. And once the prototype was made, and that's when things really took off. Yeah, the shoulder pad piece was the prototype,
yeah.
and that comes from my experience working with our elder at the university, knowledge keeper, Barb Blind. And I was thinking about these even last night when I was talking about this whole notion of synchronicity. And because I never really thought about this before, but there was a lot of things that really had to line up in order for this body of work to, externally manifest itself. Because it sometimes for me, it's a mystery as well, as the artist, believe it or not. But so it was just this, conversation I had with Barb Blind, where we were making traditional drums and rattles, and we're using the rawhide. And so this was actually one of the first times that I was using rawhide.
Because Barb was teaching you how to be
a
professor of this craft at the university.
It was really a way of transferring knowledge. And it was like the knowledge was coming from Barb, and then it was coming to me, and then it was going to my students. So there was a circle that was automatically made, and we can reference this circle as well, because it's everything's working, in this, circular formation. So anyway, Barb and I were working with the rawhide. We're building these traditional drums and rattles, and then material itself reminded me of materials that I had worked with previously, like carbon fiber and polyurethane, like really high-tech materials. And so I looked over at Barb and I said, "This material reminds me of this high-tech material." And then she said, "No." She goes, "This is the high-tech material," meaning the rawhide. And so this light bulb just went off in my head, and I was like, oh, wow, okay. So I get it. And so then it just transformed everything, my whole approach to sculpture and what I was doing. And so when we talk about the tadpole and that reference, and how it's being used in the exhibition, basically I was transformed, through that work and through working with Barb, and that one statement just kind of threw everything into a different mode as far as my way of creating and using knowledge to create.
I think it's so interesting that this is the first piece that you made, because it's kind of the most complicated in a lot of ways. It has the most pieces, but that's the nature of the hockey gear as well. So using the idea of the rawhide being a high-tech material as something that's protecting kind of the most important parts of you with all of these moving parts, I think that actually makes a lot of sense, that you would have started with this intricate piece.
Yeah, it does have a function. In like a real world reality, there's a function for it, but it also has more of a metaphysical function, and I think that was the part that was more interesting to me,
especially when you think about that fringe.
Yeah,
might get in the way. That's the metaphysical function. It might get in the way during a game, but metaphysically, it's deeply powerful. This drape. And same with the helmet here, another very complicated piece.
Oh yeah,
and gorgeous, especially with the armatures that you made to support them. The dignity of this figure that's absent, right? This is something that comes up with your absent father being the main character of this conception, and then you have this absent warrior. I called it a Theseus's ship in the intro that I wrote of when you have a hockey player and you take this much out, you take this thing out, and you take this thing out, at what point is it no longer a hockey player, right? At what point is it no longer a warrior, which is a connection that you're drawing in this work as well.
Yeah, it's definitely, it goes back to the research as well, when I was, trying to find, something that could inspire me. And when I found this Korean war shirt from the 1890s, and it was in the Field Museum in Chicago, that was a huge find for me as far as a research reference, and that's where that tadpole motif showed up.
Yep. So that's the back. I just wanted to show people the translucency. I'll skip right over the skates to the war shirt.
Yeah.
Which is it looks very much like this. The patterning is a little different, and you've made it a hockey jersey as far as the cleaning and the display of it. But this war shirt. So what I really want to talk about is this is a research intensive series.
Right.
And my background is also in arts-based research, but this is Indigenous arts-based research. And you explained to me earlier that is about part of the art is collecting the ancestral knowledge that you might not have accessed before. So you were speaking to your grandmother, you were speaking to Barb, you were speaking to members of communities that had a material knowledge, that had an embodied knowledge of these things. And that's kind of how it's separated from the traditional arts-based research that I had done, which was about just getting to know things through making art.
Yeah, it was quite a journey, and it really forced me to go look inwardly, but also to reach out to the community, my Indigenous community, my family as well. It played an important, really hugely important role in the research, because I basically had to go back in time, back to the 70s growing up, and relearn everything about my father, because he had such a brief, experience with us.
Yeah.
And so all that really was an important part of the research. Yeah. But at the same time, while I was performing all this research, it was more about the journey of self-discovery. Yeah. And I think that was a really hugely important aspect.
Yeah.
Because, working in the contemporary art field for 25 years, I basically really isolated myself and wasn't reaching out to my community. I was basically just constructing and building work and assuming I'm doing the right thing, or working in a mode where I can be happy and kind of say, okay, I'm working in these materials. I'm referencing my culture, but this new body of work was completely different because I came from a whole different area, a new area where that knowledge base was actually offered to me, and I really had to take it and run with it because it was something that I really needed to do. So I think the timing was perfect.
So we'll move along with this series. There's a close-up of that tadpole motif, where once again, you can see in this detail why I included it is because there is this shadow that you've added that is in the 19th century shirt as well. This kind of three-dimensional extra gesture on the left side of all of the tadpoles to give them this kind of depth. And this one in particular, it's a bit backlit, but you can see on the back another one of your hidden references to 17 emblazoned across the back as though it's the name of this hockey player warrior. So this is Cree for 17.
Right.
Another thing that I love about that detail of the back is the holes in the hide, where you can really, really feel, you can intuit that what it's coming from is not a perfect flat piece of material, that it had a life on a living being before, that it's a very different material than polyester.
Yeah, and it was really intentional on my part to leave that.
Yeah.
Those holes and to make it, I guess, just to have this look of that it was worn, or it had wounds.
Yeah.
Like visible wounds.
Yeah.
And I think for Indigenous people, I always reference this as well, is that this whole notion of losing my father at 17, and then I'm referencing all of this in the work, but it also references the whole notion of intergenerational trauma, and so that trauma is within that jersey that I made. You could see it; it's there, and so that's an important part, I guess, of what I'm referencing. And so you can see what that is, and so, like I said, that intergenerational trauma has become part of the post-colonial Indigenous experience, and we can't get away from it. So it's got to manifest itself within the work too.
Yeah, and that's part of the research that you were talking about, was leaning into the difficulty of the knowledge that you were.
Well, it was a really tough body of work to make, and it was emotionally really, really draining. But at the same time, when I look at the body of work now, I could see that, and I often wonder, like, once a body of work like this is actually made and finished and it's exhibited in a fantastic space like we have here, and I kind of sit back and look at it now. I'm like, okay, did I make that? Because sometimes you kind of distance yourself from it a little bit. But I do remember all the trauma that I went through to actually produce this body of work. It was hard.
I didn't say in my intro, anybody who's watching from home or is in the gallery, interrupt at any time with questions, comments, whatever. Okay. Anybody who's watching online can ask questions or make comments through the comment function on whatever platform you're joining us from. Okay, so these are the leggings, very much a similar story. Again, you can see with the backlighting that you've left those holes in there. And together you see they make up quite a snazzy hockey uniform, really.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
And as far as, so you've talked before about the idea of warrior as a branding for professional sports. professional sports players. And I love the idea of your team being the tadpoles, right? with this branding, because in Plains Cree culture, the tadpole is used for warriors because their potency is derived from their potential, as opposed to thinking they're weak because they're young and inexperienced. Their
Right.
potential is what gives them. So as a more than transformation, it's transformation that just by the very fact that it is happening is something huge, is something substantial, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. And I think when I referenced that war shirt from the 1890s, it was really apparent that the maker of that war shirt was referencing that tadpole or whatever. It looked like a sperm motif as well.
But you
And
pointed
so,
out they wouldn't have known what sperm looked like in 90. Yeah.
And so the motif itself had so much power
Yeah.
that even when I looked at it, I was like, wow, I was like blown away. And I thought, okay, if this, our artists from the 1890s, can use that motif and to use it in a real powerful sense.
So powerful, yeah.
And I thought, well, I've got to use some of that power in my exhibition as well. And so that type of motif is really, really significant as far as how that body of work moved on. And if it wasn't for that particular reference in the research, it wouldn't have happened. Yeah. And so that's what I was also saying about how things kind of lined up, that, I really couldn't foresee any of this stuff. But when it actually came through in the research, that's how everything started happening.
Yeah.
So it was really important to go through that research mode.
I want to get to the other work because I think the through line is so relevant to where you're at right now from the earlier work that we have as well. But we love the shin pads, especially when they're top lit like that, because they look almost like they were made with Play-Doh. And there's so much materiality in this series in particular. And in this one, you can just imagine the rawhide soft. You can see your hands pressing into it. And now it's this very rigid, protective covering. Also look very much like that alien trader in Star Wars with the big snout when they're floating all on their own.
There is kind of, when I first exhibited this work, I had a bit of a chance to sort of think about the work, and I was sitting in the gallery by myself, and I thought the way that everything was designed had an intention, and whether I knew it or not. And I sat back and I was looking at it, and all these pieces were just floating, like literally like floating in the air, because you can't see the armature, because the armature is black and the wall's black, and so everything blends in. And so I was thinking about it because it all of a sudden had this sci-fi vibe, like it was some kind of weird sci-fi movie, and so I kind of like that reference too, because it's an important sort of part of, like, when I was growing up, sci-fi was really something that we really gravitated towards.
Absolutely.
And so there's like all these really strange sort of coincidences that happened with this body of work.
I've been I commented that with this really bright top lighting, it looks like an archaeological museum, like the kind of thing that would be behind glass and lit, and nobody was allowed to touch it. And combined with that absolutely sci-fi kind of dystopian environment, I love how it draws attention to the absurdity of those collections, where they take something that was just an object that was part of ceremony, part of culture, and take it completely out of context, shine a spotlight on it, and take its soul away from it, take its life away from it, right?
Yeah, and then the whole notion of reconstructing and also deconstructing this the entire hockey ensemble, and then the way that it's reproduced, with all of this indigenous knowledge and the knowledge, the brand new knowledge that I acquired, through working with our elder Bart Blind and having Kathy Mattis as my mentor. All this had to have a reaction. And it had to, like I said, it has to manifest itself somehow through the work. And it did. And I was like really super, almost surprised as anybody else. And I was like, because the actual, like that shin pad piece, you can really see what's going on. Like as far as like a sculpture, because you can see how it's made. You can see what the reference is behind the way that it's molded around the actual object. So in other words, the object is I talked about simulacrum within the work itself, or simulation. And so what happened is that the original form, the original reference to that form doesn't exist anymore. So it was destroyed. And what exists now is what we have in front of us is basically, it's not a reference anymore. It's a real object. But the original object is completely gone. It's destroyed. So I like that aspect as well.
Yeah. And that's really interesting. Like, these shin pads, and then the gloves, which have less muscle behind them, but so much care, and the fact that everything is hand stitched, and the idea of the making as a way of learning, and as a way of expressing knowledge, right? So it becomes literally making is knowing, right? In those two.
Well, there's an interesting story about the gloves and the jersey.
Yeah.
So I was making this at the U of R, and I had a studio in the Department of Fine Arts there. One of my fellow students came by, because they could hear me working in the studio.
Yeah.
And my exhibition was coming up like really, really quickly. And so I literally had like 4 days to get like the gloves and the jersey and that together. So one of my fellow MFA students came in, and she works a lot with materials and sewing things together. And then she said to me, "How many days you got?" I said, 4 days. And she goes, "Oh." It's like, so I was literally like for like 12 hours at a time putting this stuff together, because I didn't realize how much. Yeah, because it was so much work, and I was like, because you can't cut any corners. Like it has to be, you have to follow everything that to construct it. But also at the same time, there was a lot of pain involved with the actual stitching, because I stitched everything by hand. And so the other sort of metaphor that came out of that was that I was actually stitching together my identity. At the same time, when I'm producing the work, that's what it became really apparent to me, is that, my identity is being stitched together at the same time. And so that's another great sort of reference to my Indigenous culture, because it's being offered to me, but it's like, you have to stitch it together. You're the one that has to do it physically. And that's the other part. It was really painful. It was like a rebirth. And they always say birth is really hard. It was hard for me because I love
the armature on this one is also so integral to the work. If they were just on the plinth, hung over each other, instead it looks like they're stitching themselves, right? They're in this really, really meticulous position, and floating in this way, right? Yeah. Okay. Any questions before we leave 17? We're gonna go back in time to our second portal. Yes.
Kevin, how do you prefer experiential work? Is it electronic good enough? I mean, when I was back there, I could see the difference between tanned hide and natural hide. Mm-hmm. And if that's important to think people are getting that, then they don't come out and experience it.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I guess we have to utilize technology.
I'm just going to repeat that question as I summarize that question. I'm going to summarize for people online. So the question is how Kevin prefers people experience the work, if digital can ever be sufficient for in-person experiences. Is that?
Well, like I was saying, it's important to utilize technology that we have. But nothing's really going to take the place of actually coming in and experiencing the work itself, because it's so interactive, and there's so many things that you get out of the work by experiencing it within the gallery situation. So it can't be replaced, but this is the day and age we're living in now. So it's technology has to be utilized somehow.
It's a wonderful gift, and some work, I think, translates. I say this as a curator, not as Kevin. In this case, though, it's missing a human body. So trying to experience it without having your body next to these shapes in the form of a human body is, it's never going to equal it, right? Even choosing the height of the plinths that we used was to make sure that this warrior was tall, was occupying a human space with you. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Well, the figure is definitely referenced in there. So the figure has to be. I guess when you're looking at it, you'd have to use your own imagination to figure out what that would be.
Well, it's a body in relationship to your own body, right?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And these are physical things.
Exactly.
Yeah. So a Facebook user is seeing faces in the shin pads and the gloves. I think maybe the gloves are like the little...
Well, they definitely have this kind of reference of a mask.
Yeah.
And so that mask motif really comes through some of those pieces, and that wasn't intentional, but people can see different things or experience different things within the work that I didn't intentionally put that there, but subliminally it could be there as well.
Yeah.
You know, and so that, like I said, that mask motif does show up.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to move on to the next portal. I think everybody in the gallery has been behind this wall. Behind me, people online can see a glow over my head here. It's because this is one of the oldest pieces in the exhibition is on the right here, Father, Son, Holy Ghost from 2015. And on the left, Resurrection from 2017. And these are similar but unidentical. So let's start with Resurrection. Which most notably, it has the center bison skull is kind of a mesh material. So it has this more intense transparency as opposed to the other two, which have a translucence.
Right.
So tell me about Resurrection.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, Resurrection was another piece that I produced at the U of R. I was working as an artist in residence at that particular time, and so I had a really nice working space at the U of R. So it was great to be there, and so I wanted to use the buffalo skull as the motif because it's an important motif to Indigenous people. It's usually like the center of ceremony, so it's always present during ritual. And so I wanted to keep or utilize that motif, but not using the actual skull itself. So what I did was make a mold of a buffalo skull and then cast it in polyurethane. And so I'm using the motif, but I'm not using the actual skull. And that was really important to me. And then I wanted to have it lit, but lit up with a light coming from the piece itself. And the only way I could do that was find somebody that did neon. And so I was definitely wanted to use neon for sure, because I really like that aesthetic of what neon is.
We've talked a lot about all of the things that are so cool about neon, and culturally, I think is the most interesting thing, right?
Yeah, it goes back. There's this whole nostalgia reference with neon, and so I found an artist that worked with neon in Regina, and so
the last surviving, I'm sure.
Yeah, he was like 80 years old, and not very many people work with neon anymore because it's kind of a dying art. So I was really happy to find this guy, and so I brought my skulls into his studio, and I said, okay, can you construct me some neon that I could use right onto the skull, and then I wanted to use this cog as a reference as well, and have a ring of neon in that piece. And so all three of them come together with the neon, and then I just call it resurrection, because it just seemed like it had its own life, and it was, I was constantly referencing, my childhood. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it goes back, and I think when I talk about these pieces, something comes to mind about Dana Warren, and she did the essay for my exhibition, Resurrection. And she was saying that these works are autobiographical. In other words, they're more like a self-portrait. Because of my Catholic upbringing, and then I'm referencing those Catholic motifs, and I'm also referencing the indigenous motifs. So there was always this kind of constant tension between those aspects of my youth, and then they're being manifested throughout the work.
Let me see what other details we have here. So, yes, that's rushing ahead. So, yes, we have these two, and they're facing each other in a very difficult to photograph corridor.
Yeah.
We really wanted to draw people back into this kind of mysterious, and you talked about sci-fi.
Mm-hmm.
This one is, I think, part of those cultural references. So at the opening, the first time that we had a crowd in here, people really did linger in there, right? It has a different spirit as a space than other spaces, right? We talked about the dystopian and the retro as a time travel mechanism.
Yeah, and that was, I think, because I wasn't quite sure how logistically it was going to work out. And you're the curator, so you were the one that had to sort of build this in the gallery, and I wasn't quite sure how it was going to work. And at the same time, it was a big surprise to me too, because I'm constantly referencing everything was like a portal, and even like the 17, the healing circle, and all that became a portal as well. So it's definitely referencing what back and forth through time. And I think the way that you've curated this work into the space, it's definitely, to me, it feels like a portal.
A passage for sure.
Yeah, you're going through something.
Yeah.
And the pieces themselves are very hypnotic because of the neon and because of those references that can be apparent, but when you're going through and experiencing it, I think that there's a lot of tension there that's really unexpected.
Yeah.
And that tension is really, I think, something that you have to come and experience it, because it's not going to.
Right.
Yeah. And
you're talking about something very literal when you talk about a time travel, though.
Yeah.
When you use the tadpole motif, you're literally keeping it alive.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, and it became really apparent when I was sitting in the gallery at the U of R, Fifth Parallel, just by myself, and was looking at the work, and I was like, I thought, this is like what I actually made was a time machine.
Yeah.
And that's not like it's not a joke. It's not. I'm not kidding.
It's not a metaphor.
It's a real.
Yeah.
It's a time machine.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow. And then it's. I think in Western culture, it's hard for people to grasp something like that. But in indigenous culture, it's not that hard to grasp.
Yeah.
It's there, and it is a time machine. So.
Yeah.
And so it kind of works the same way with that corridor of neon, because you have to go through it, and you're like, okay, there's a lot of tension there. You might end up somewhere in a different time period. So that was kind of intentional too.
Yeah, neon is because we'll talk about neon again, but let's go to these recent resin skulls. We made 3 of them this summer for this exhibition.
Yeah.
So here we have 350 CI.
Yeah.
And the 63 Bel Air, and then at the front of the gallery we have custom. So this is the same technique that you use to cast the resin skulls that we just saw.
Right.
It's the same skull, I think, again and again as well, right?
Yes.
Which is very interesting.
Yeah.
Like you cloned this one bison.
Yeah.
So
It's a clone. Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah. You've been doing these hot rod skulls.
Yeah.
Since 2003 at least.
Yes.
Yeah. The ones in the National Gallery are from 2003.
Yeah.
And the idea of the casting, this is what we're talking about with the simulacrum, is it's the opposite of the way that you formed your rawhide pieces. Right?
Yes.
You have an emptiness as opposed to a fullness.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think it was really important for this particular body of work and this exhibition itself that I was referencing the hot rod again, because I was building my own hot rod at the same time, and we talked about that, about the public sculpture that I'm doing for Brandon University, and so at one point I was going to the Can Steel, which is the fabrication shop, and going to their facility every day and working on this giant sculpture, and I'm working in this cathedral.
Hold that up for people at home. From the booklet. There you go.
This industrial cathedral.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, huge cathedral of a space.
Yeah, so it was really a really strange experience for me, because I'm working on the sculpture in this, what I call an industrial cathedral, and then in the evening I'm going to Carberry and working on my 63 Bel Air.
63 Bel Air.
Yeah, and so it was working in tandem with the sculpture and then the hot rod. And so I thought, well, I have these skulls here, so I might as well just paint them the same color as the car. And then so the skulls became part of that process of working with the hot rod. So the skulls themselves are referencing the car, the engine, and then the whole notion of customization is huge in the car culture, because you're building something on your own, you're customizing it yourself, and you're painting it yourself. So that hot rod culture comes from quite a few years back when I was living in Vancouver, and I was hanging out with these lowbrow artists that I found that were really cool. Like one particular artist, his name's 12 Midnight. Another guy's name was Brain Eater. And these guys are really iconic in Vancouver. Actually, 12 Midnight, he calls himself the Lord of Lowbrow. And these guys always reference car culture and all kinds of different things.
Yeah.
And so I really enjoyed that sort of mesh, or that utilization of lowbrow and kind of counterculture or underground culture, and have that as part of my work, in the gallery situation, because it's those kind of references are really important to me.
You've said before that bisons are the hot rod of the animal kingdom just because of the power, but I was thinking about customization in this process. There's a bit of creating a one-on-one connection with this particular skull, right? As you handle it in this careful way, the same way that a 63 Bel Air exists. Other people have them, but this one's yours. Right?
Yeah.
The one I'm working on is yours now.
But it's also it also references that knowledge base of, say, if I was living 3 or 4 centuries back in time, I'd be painting the buffalo skull myself and using that in ceremony. And it's the same thing, because it's basically I'm painting my skull, and I'm referencing my car and there's so many different things that are going on within those that process. And I find it really interesting because it's something that I gravitated towards, and that whole notion of something being lowbrow is
Right.
it's really interesting to me to bring that reference into the work and have it exhibited, because it's basically, you know, that underground car culture. It doesn't often show up in these type of situations.
Yeah. And this custom in particular, you said all of the pinstripes, you know, are very much about that obsessive care, right? Like they're meticulous and they're necessary.
Yeah, this was it was a really tough piece because the lettering is really hard, and the pinstriping is extremely hard to do, and you know, as an artist, I always try to take things on and utilize techniques that I might not be familiar with. And I was watching all these videos on guys doing pinstriping, and it make it look so easy. I'm like, oh man, I can do this. And then I attempted it, and it was like extremely difficult. And then I was like, and I was thinking to myself, you know, because I wanted to use the pinstripe at least on one of the pieces.
Yeah.
And then I kept practicing my pinstriping, and I was like, this is like really, really, really extremely hard.
Yeah.
Like a discipline. And you know, I just assumed that you just pick up a pinstriping brush and then it will just happen.
Like they do in the videos.
And it doesn't. It was extremely hard. But I really committed myself to it, and I thought, okay, it's got to happen, because it's you know, I already said I'm going to produce this piece called Custom. Yeah. And so I did it. It was like I kind of.
This is, I think, as you keep talking about serendipity. You said the pieces. From the early noughts, you did with like stencils and airbrushing, and you made them very meticulous as though they were your cars. Now you have your own car that you're working on with your own hands, and you've made these after not making them for a while, after hand sewing an entire hockey player. So that idea of connecting through time, the same concept, but now with the knowledge that you've gained. So now it's more handmade. Now there is more shaking in it. There's more of your touch on these pieces, right?
Yeah. And there's way more of a connection to these pieces, because of the process of building the hot rod, and having that as, you know, working in tandem with other pieces of art that I'm building. And so the hot rod became a really integral part of the entire process. And so that lowbrow sort of reference really kept me grounded. Yeah. You know, and then even like these particular skulls with the numbers and painted on them, those are all referenced like a 1960s motif. Right. So it's very, very retro.
Yeah. Yeah. And this one especially we talked about looks like a jersey too.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does kind of reference that too, in a sense.
So now we will have 10 minutes left, so we'll talk about the maquette, which is what we have. But speaking of simulacrum, stands in for a 30-foot sculpture that is that it's on its way to being birthed. The photo that you can see here is the maquette in front of a documentary, a short documentary about the making of the fabrication of the big thing. So the still, serendipitously, is of the full-size thing in the fabrication plant with the subtraction and stitching holes already cut into it. So the video eventually will be posted online for everybody to see. For now, you have to come into the gallery, where we do have a QR code if you don't want to stand and watch it. It's about 8.5 minutes long and was edited by Broden Halcrow-Ducharme. But to the maquette. Okay. So this is, we're calling it Untitled Reconciliation Sculpture, commissioned by Brandon University for you. Tell me the story of the sculpture.
It was an interesting story because it was the president's office wanted to have like a sculpture submitted and built that would be Brandon University's reference to the Truth and Reconciliation. So it would be a sculpture dedicated to that concept. And they were going to put out a call for artists to submit. And then my department stepped in and said, hold it, we have an Indigenous artist here on campus. And so so they asked me if I would like to submit a project. And so, not talk about pressure. It's like,
Just stand in for all Indigenous people when it comes to truth and reconciliation.
So then, I was designing something, and the I came up with this maquette. It's like 14 inches high, made out of metal. And my notion of what truth and reconciliation is it's really, really abstract. And if you ask Indigenous people what it means, everybody's going to have a different take on what it means. And for me,
it's a strange word. It's, because you reconcile at the end of a business day to make sure that the books balance. You can't do that.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And I look at things like, from my own experience. And I was talking to my mom and talking about my father, and his experience. He went through, residential school. And then, my grandma was, this was last year and the year before, we're talking to my grandma. She was 101 years old. And then she related the story to us when we were all sitting there at her 101 first birthday. And she related the story about that she never went to residential school, but two of her siblings went to residential school, and one never returned.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't hear about this story for our entire lives until our grandma told us the story, at her 101st birthday. So it was really bizarre. And then I thought, okay, then this whole concept is abstract. And so when I designed the maquette, I wanted like truth to be very linear and very these two planes come together, and they offset each other, but there's a balance. And so then there's this subtraction that I cut out of that with torch, and then drilled these holes to stitch in this. In the maquette, it's sinew, and so you have metal and sinew. You've got the subtraction, and so when I started showing
sinew as well. So sinew is what you used for thread.
Yes.
In the 17 series as well, and it's guts, right?
Yes.
And it's always red sinew that you use.
Yeah, it can be red or it can be like more of a flesh tone.
But you've consistently used red.
Yes.
Yeah. And can you talk about that as just a material as well? Just.
It's
there's a metaphor of the stretching arteries.
Yeah. Like sinew is a natural product.
Yeah.
From animal muscle tissue, and Indigenous people have been using it for centuries to construct pieces of art or use it as a material to build things or to stitch things together. And so I referenced that in the maquette. And so once I had the maquette, then I was showing it to the community. And then I had a big meeting with the president, and a few people from the Indigenous community were there as well. And so the president, he liked it very automatically. He's like, I don't know what this means, but he goes the abstract nature of it is really what makes it interesting, because you can interpret it whatever way you want. We had so many people looking at it, and people could see the constellation, or they could see like a river, or they could see like all the little holes represented maybe these missing children and things like that. And so and then it could be a scar, but it could be healing. It could be there's so many things going on with it. And so once the maquette was sort of analyzed, and then everybody said, okay, well, let's just go with this, because it has what we're looking for, and the president said, this is what we want. And so then we, have taken it to Can Steel, which is a fabrication shop here in Brandon, and we wanted to keep it local as well. And so that was really a really important aspect, to keep it within the community. And so we're looking at a 14-inch maquette, and now it's being like a 24-foot sculpture. And so just being part of that experience in the Can Steel facility was absolutely amazing, because it's when as the designer and the person who made the actual maquette and designed it, it really seems kind of unreal when you're in this huge fabrication shop and you got all these technicians running around, and there's giant machines everywhere that are super dangerous. And so it was just this kind of really strange environment, and so I was really happy to be part of it, because I basically said insisted that I had to be part of the fabrication process, and so I'm overseeing everything, and I'm walking along on top of that, the metal, and drawing this thing out, and so it was the same process as what the 14-inch maquette, but like I said, this is the 24-foot object now, and so that whole experience was just absolutely kind of.
I love, so the president's office loaned us the maquette for the exhibition. I love treating the maquette as an artwork in and of itself.
Oh yeah.
Hugely, because imagining it at 24 feet high, and then hearing what you've said about all these different interpretations, the idea of something as small as a scar or as large as the cosmos, you have to look at that and understand that it stands in for enormity, right? And then that a scar can be enormous as well, right? Mm-hmm. We have a Facebook user who's wondering what you're going to use for the sinew in the large sculpture.
Oh yeah, it was really, really hard to find a product that might simulate or we can't use like sinew in this giant sculpture.
Too tasty was the joke.
Yeah, so it was really, really difficult, because we were looking at a number of different products that we might use, and we kept going back and forth to maybe like a cable with like a metal cable with a coating of plastic or something. So we kept going back and forth trying to find something that might work, and it's just recently, very, very recently, I was doing some research, and I found a synthetic cable, and so it's made for people with trucks and things like that for the winches.
Okay,
it's a winching cable, but it's a synthetic rope. And so it has the same properties as sinew, even though it's a synthetic product, and it's UV protected and everything. So I thought, wow, this is exactly what I'm looking for, And so, it's really bright. Yeah, and it's not actually on the actual sculpture yet.
Right.
We'll be doing that next week. Yeah, and so.
And that should be. Being installed before the school year starts, maybe.
We don't know the schedule yet. Yeah. But the other great thing, and this is really awesome. Once we have the sculpture, once it's all ready to go and finish, and all that stitching is done, which I'll do next week, Can Steel is going to put it up in there at the facility. They have this giant crane. It's all rusty. It looks like it's something from the 1940s, and they're going to put it in between that.
You're
crane.
Like, hey, I love rusty old things.
Yeah. So it's going to sit there until the platform's ready at BU. And so it's actually going to have its own, place where it's going to be exhibited in tandem with this giant crane. And so it's going to have this really, really awesome aesthetic.
Yeah, that's great.
And so it's going to be there for a few weeks, and you can peek through the fence at Can Steel and have a look at it. And so I'm looking forward to actually like taping that and getting that.
Orientation of it when it's on the site.
Yeah.
What will the big slab face, the tallest blank slab? Which way that?
That's going to
The
face.
question is about the orientation of the sculpture when it's outside.
Yeah, well, it's going to be orientated where the back of the sculpture will be facing the university, and then the other plane will be facing the street.
Facing the street, so pointing at the
Yeah,
street.
pointing at the street.
Which means
East-west axis.
Yes, yeah. And so when you see it, you'll be able to experience walking down the sidewalk. You can see the subtraction and all that. And I haven't seen it standing up yet, and so I'm waiting to experience that myself.
Corner between Jarrett Hall and Flora County, or
20th and Louise.
20th and Louise.
20th and Louise. So that means, for people who aren't familiar with Brandon, that it's going to be a solid plane to the east with the subtraction on. So the shadow will always be cast to the north and then move.
Yeah. Shadows are really important for this piece.
Super important. That's what I'm most excited to stand in.
Yeah,
To experience
that.
it. Yeah. We've gone over an hour.
Okay.
I like to keep things an hour, but
Yep.
I'm running the show. So if there's anything that we wanted to add, that was my last slide. So we're
Okay.
actually perfect.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you wanted to add that we didn't touch? I forgot to say thank you to New System Store right here in Brandon, Canada Council for the Arts, Manitoba Arts Council, and the City of Brandon for supporting this exhibition. There are a lot of players at work, and you've already mentioned your community and your mentors. But if there's anybody else that you'd like to thank now, Grandma.
Yeah. No, I think our conversation worked out really well, and I don't really have very much to add at this point.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
thank
great.
you so much for this conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. It's been a blast. Enjoy our sign-off screen that is a picture of Kevin's 63 Bel Air. Yeah.
Awesome.